everyone, it's Kate from VALÄRE, and today I'm going to go over one of the topics that I really commonly get asked, and that is how do you schedule your strength training around your endurance training for triathletes? Many triathletes complete high training loads of swimming, cycling and running, and this can make it quite difficult to know where you should put in your strength training. Whilst it's generally not recommended practice, we acknowledge that strength training needs to be completed in close proximity to endurance training due to the high training demands, scheduling restraints, and the logistics of endurance training. So it is important to acknowledge that this may result in a slight short-term detriment to endurance training, and this is referred to as resistance training-induced sub-optimization of endurance performance, or known as RT-SEP. This sub-optimization does vary immensely, and this depends on your strength training background, your endurance training background, and how accustomed you are to the loads that you'll be putting into your body. So for example, some research has shown that in untrained individuals, a typical lower body strength training session, so let's say for example that has squats and leg press, that can impair running economy for up to 48 hours after the training session. However, in individuals with a big strength training history, studies have reported that strength training sessions may actually have no negative effect on running economy 6 hours after strength training. But that doesn't mean that if you are accustomed to strength training that you are immune to fatigue from strength training, as physiological adaptations still occur regardless of the level of the athlete. So ideally, for you to optimize how to schedule in strength training, your goals need to take priority, and these should guide where you should schedule each session. So this is called adapting a priority concept, and it's particularly useful when you're not in the peak of your training and rather you're focusing on your weaknesses. So let's say, for example, you want to focus on your weakest link in training, and this may be your lack of strength. Let's say that you feel a little bit weak on the back end of the bike or the run, and maybe you're getting consistent niggles and you just feel like your body's not quite strong enough to say handle that Ironman distance or your iron distance load training. So therefore, you may want to prioritize your strength training sessions and accept a possible short-term sub-optimization of your endurance performance. Alternatively, you may be getting really close to your peak race or your A race or your big racing season, and therefore you really want to prioritize your endurance training performance rather than your strength training, and therefore you should put these first in your training. But here's some general considerations for you to keep in mind when it comes to scheduling in your strength training for triathlon. Now, if possible, and this probably isn't possible, but you should have a dedicated strength training day where you have no other endurance training. With that in mind, this should also not be a rest day, because rest days are there for your body to recover, and you don't want to be putting strength training in because it still causes fatigue and physiological adaptations, and this can hinder your recovery. Now, like I said, this probably isn't possible. So generally, we recommend that you complete your endurance training session first, and then you follow this with your strength training session. So ideally, your strength training session should actually be 6 to 9 hours after your first endurance session of the day. This just allows for more time and more optimal recovery and adaptations to occur. And this 6 to 9 hour window is particularly important in running, where there's eccentric muscle contractions and a ground reaction force that results in high amounts of fatigue. Now, if this isn't possible, don't worry, you can complete your strength training session first. Sometimes you just have to because of logistics, but then what I'd recommend is completing a swim or a cycle session second, ideally with these below anaerobic threshold. Again, it's okay if you have a run scheduled and if you have to do that as the second session of your day, but ideally if you can, also keep that below your anaerobic threshold as well. There is actually a little bit of research, and this is more in rugby players and team sport athletes, but there is some research that shows that actually doing your strength training session first in the day can increase or can naturally increase your testosterone, and that can actually boost your performance in the second session of the day. This hasn't been looked at in triathletes yet, but it may actually be beneficial overall to improve your adaptations from strength training if you do them second. Also, if you're really accustomed to strength training and you don't really feel that fatigue from your strength training sessions, then it's completely fine to do them for your first session of the day and then you do your endurance session later on in the day. I've been strength training for many years, and I personally never find any form of negative impact from doing my strength training first and my endurance training sessions second. Generally, when it comes to incorporating in those key interval sessions, particularly running interval sessions, so anything above anaerobic threshold, aim to keep these about 48 hours after a high load strength training session. You don't have to follow that rule quite so much if you're doing a lower load strength training session, but if you're lifting really heavy and it's movements that involve the lower limbs, then ideally do try and space them out by about 2 days if possible. You can also complement muscle groups used during your endurance and your strength training sessions. So you may want to play around with your training and see where it fits in. And say, for example, you could do a swim session first, do that in the morning, and then you can go heavy and hard for a lower body gym session in the afternoon. Or vice versa. If you're doing a really heavy gym session in the morning, you could probably get away with a higher intensity swim in the afternoon because it's more upper body dominant. It is also really important to monitor your levels of fatigue between your strength and endurance training sessions. You can do this using resting heart rate, rating of perceived exertion, or generally I just like to ask myself, how do I feel? And pop it on a fatigue scale, and we do have that in the app. And then this can make modifications to your strength training sessions. So you can modify your sets, your reps, and your weight as it's required. I'd also really recommend that if you are doing a higher intensity run in the morning, let's say, for example, you have an early morning track session, then really try to avoid doing anything like plyometrics or anything really heavy loading in the gym that afternoon. Make sure you give yourself that time to recover if you're doing a really hard run in the morning. You should keep in mind that these recommendations are not likely feasible to be followed the whole year around. You can always modify these based on how you feel. You might find that if you're starting off in strength training and you're quite new to it, you may really feel that fatigue and you may get those really heavy legs from your strength training sessions, particularly for the first 2 to 4 weeks. What I'd recommend then is, again, making that your second session of the day so you're not feeling like you're really negatively affecting that first session of the day. Or for those logistics, if you can't do that, then just modify those weights a little bit more. You can dial them back a little bit so you're not feeling that excessive fatigue. Like I said, complement it more with a swim or a bike, where generally you can get away with those heavy legs a little bit more so than your run. Whatever it is and however it is that you're trying to schedule in your strength training, think about your goals and adopt that priority concept. If you're in the off season and you really want to fit in your strength training, make it your priority. Accept that short potential sub-optimization of your endurance performance because it will pay off in the long run, and that is what your research shows. But if you're peaking towards your A races, you don't want that. You really want to nail those endurance sessions. So really make sure that you can modify around how you're trying to schedule that, modify those sets, reps, and loads, and make sure that you're fitting it in at the right time of your scheduling. If you found this helpful, make sure you subscribe for more information. And if you have any questions about how to schedule in your strength training, make sure you pop them in the comments below. And until next time, see you later.